My name is Khristayle Joy Tan. I am studying at the Education University of Hong Kong. I am now studying Bachelor of Education in the English language. I think as a student, okay, a little bit of background. I was born in Hong Kong to a pair of Filipino parents. So growing up in school, in primary school, during the first few years studying there, we didn't really pay attention to our ethnicity, nationality. We all really got along well. But then I'm not sure really what happened, but there was a time where we started to notice about our diversity, and then we started getting into our different ethnic groups. So there was a group of Filipinos, group Nepalese, but then, even though I was ethnically Filipino, I didn't feel as if I could connect with them very well because even I wasn't sure about my own ethnic identity. And then in high school, so the first 4 years of my high school was was in a different school. So there were like 20, let's say during my time there were at least 25% in one form. 25% of us were non-Chinese, and then the rest were Chinese students. And knowing that, there's such a small percentage of non-Chinese students, we all had to stick together. But at the same time, it was also difficult for me because, I couldn't really connect with anyone that well. So it was quite hard for me during those first 4 years of high school. But then during my last 2 years of high school, I changed school to Broadway, where almost 98% of students were non-Chinese. So right there, I could connect well with some people because there are some people who almost had the same background as I did, who were, let's say, Filipinos, but, were more raised in Hong Kong. And then, I find that it was easier to connect with people that way. There are only a few I can remember, just mainly because, one, they really paid a lot of attention to us because they knew that we would have a bit more difficulties, especially learning the Chinese language in class. So in class, there are some obvious difference. Some of us could handle the Chinese language very well. Some of us couldn't. And so during one of the years, we were separated into two classes: higher proficiency, lower proficiency. And then so I was put in the lower proficiency class. But our teacher was very patient with us because she knew that we really need to pick up a language for an exam we were doing. So that class was in Mandarin. So it was okay. It was easier for me to pick up the language. Just mostly the Chinese characters were easier. It's easier to also pick up the pronunciation. But then when I went to Broadway, so they also did Chinese classes for non-Chinese students, but it was in Cantonese. So I found it hard to adapt during my first year in Broadway because I had to shift from learning Mandarin to Cantonese, and also there was a difference in characters. So even if I did a written exam, but I could be put in a higher proficiency class. But then the teacher I had at the time understood that I was still having difficulties because I would get confused with the language. Even sometimes during speaking exams, I would mix up between Mandarin and Cantonese. And then also for writing especially, he had the patience he understood what I was writing basically. So, but then he just gives me constant reminders that, okay, you have to remember you're writing in the traditional Chinese rather than simplified. I find he was very patient. He was very understanding to us non-Chinese because he knew that non-Chinese students are kind of people who they can't sit still. And so he really handles us very well. I think it was with the way he talked with us. It was also how was it, pleasant, to handle. Compared to another Chinese teacher I had, she was more direct, more forceful. But the teacher I had, he was our vice principal. He was more gentle in speaking with us. He seemed more understanding. And then he would, listen to us first, understand why did we write things a certain way. And if he figures out, he understands where the problem lies. And then from that, he will, okay, go back. Okay, this is actually how it's done. Start from the bottom until, going back to the top again.
So patience is very important.
Patience, especially a lot of ethnic minorities, they each have their different backgrounds and not all of them have the same learning capabilities. and some of them might need more attention than others. I think it had to do because the class with our vice principal was a smaller class, so there are about only 7 of us, 7 or 8, less than 10. So it was easier for him to focus on each one of us, to individually tell us, okay, we had problems here and there. But in another class, it was around less than 20, but it was a lot, and it was hard for her to kind of help us pinpoint our mistakes. And then I can't say she was an effective teacher, because most of the time she would just teach in the front and then just keep talking all the time and expects us to learn things right away, especially with all repetition. And some students, we can repeat, but then after class we just can't remember what's happening, because she just mostly moves at the front. Even I think I had a problem to do when students ask questions. So sometimes it would be hard for students to ask their questions verbally in the class, and then the teacher would just stand there trying to make them repeat the question instead of going there, looking what they had on a paper, and asking, okay, like showing, okay, can you show me what is the issue you have here, and maybe I can help you, like that. I think it has to do with the class size. Looking back, the other class I had with the vice principal, it was only less than 10 of us, so it's easier. We had more time. But for her, it was more than 10, but less than 20. But then we couldn't put much focus on individual students' needs. I think even before class starts, when planning out the materials, even if they're given a set of materials to follow, they can also try and understand the students, where they're coming from, so that it might be easier for the teacher when she teaches, because maybe of this background or something like that. That's why the student learns this way. This is why the student reacts that way. Because for some students, if you talk about certain contexts and then teach the language through that context, they learn it better because they can connect very well. But some might be different. Some, learn different ways.
So understanding the different learning styles in the class and everyone's backgrounds.
And everyone's backgrounds too, because it helps, I guess they have to try to help students understand where they come from, I guess. I'm not sure how to put it. But then even though we had cultural weeks at schools where you learn about your own culture, but at the same time, you don't really feel like you connect. I mean, let me try.
What did you do during those cultural weeks?
Like like a certain, let's say, Filipinos, some people are chosen to give a performance. Even I was chosen to give a performance, but I felt as if I didn't learn anything from that would help me connect me more better to my culture. I think that's why I found it hard, like in high school, because this even with all my academic problems, but then I found it hard fitting in because I couldn't understand my own culture. And I think that teachers should, try to find a way, to reach out to students, like help them, make them understand that sense. I don't know how, but I'm not sure if it can be done. Like to learn more about the culture and learn about third culture kids, and then see what's going on in their minds. But try something, I don't know. To try not to be, they have to expect the noise that comes from these classes, because I've taught Chinese students, I've taught non-Chinese students. The Chinese students are usually more quieter, and for the non-Chinese students, they're a bit more outspoken. Sometimes they can get a little bit out of control, but I guess it's just the way they are. And then the teachers have to understand that. So even if the student might be noisy in class, probably it's the student's way of telling the teacher, oh, we're listening, but then, you're not really getting our attention. So it's just a student trying to tell the teacher, there might be something more. And then I think that can tell the teacher that, that's something they can learn from, rather than teaching that, thinking that that's a disobedience, disciplining the kid. And for sure, the student's going to do something worse than what they did. So that's one tip. They could probably, take some time, maybe talk with the student, I'm not sure, or maybe like do some little research by themselves, because because usually when we ask teachers, oh, what do they know about the culture of these group of particular students, they usually talk about, oh, they know that all they know is about the food, the music. It's kind of very shallow knowledge. So I think what they can do is maybe do a little research by themselves, I guess, understanding the in-depth cultural differences of the different ethnicities. Also, maybe take the time to talk to their students. Why do you think, for example, why do you think this guy reacted like this? Is it something I said? It's something that I did that probably, that he didn't like, that offended him. That's why he reacted that way. I think it might be difficult to train, to be honest, because it's not something that, well, they could have a little bit of training, but then at the same time, they should learn as they go. Because, just someone telling you, okay, these people, these ethnic minorities are like this. You have to be mindful of this and that. You have to understand this and that. But then that might not be true because that's just a general assumption. So, because not only are they ethnically different, but then even within those ethnic, even though within that ethnic group of students, each of them still has their own differences. So all they can do is just try and learn along the way, and that's when you have to have patience again, and all this and that.
And then take the time out.
Take the time out to talk with them, because probably they're also having difficulties at home, difficulties elsewhere. So there's a lot of things you have to learn on the way. Because it's especially harder for non-Chinese students because, I don't know, it might not be easier. Because usually, having experience in designated schools, usually those schools are like for non-Chinese students but local curriculum. And then for non-Chinese students, most of the students who get into that school, they're usually living they're part of the lower income families. So they're facing difficulties at home. And then along with those difficulties, they also face, some of them, they haven't been in Hong Kong for so long. They're still having, culture shock, trying to figure out the language. And along with that, they're still having to face at schools. And even some of these students have, they might have problems. Yeah, teachers have to recognize, problems. I mean, it might be difficult to understand each individual, but I guess understanding that there's these problems at home, and it might help teachers be more sensitive to how they, interact with different students. I think one experience, let's see, I had a teacher who was very open-minded, free to talk with students. So there's this one subject, liberal studies. It was very difficult for me to teach. So during my 2 years in Broadway, I had two different teachers. So in my Form 5, we had a teacher who would just sit all day. Not sit all day. He would just teach us, and then we kind of got the feeling that he was kind of lazy, because even when he answered questions, he wasn't very sincere, and he answered them, and then he wasn't very approachable at the same time when you want to ask questions. But in Form 6, we had another LS teacher, and even though he was new, and then the way he taught, he was very open. He allowed us to ask questions even during recess. He was very welcoming. During our study period for preparation for our exams, he was okay with us, approaching the teacher's office, because he understood it can be very stressful for us, and then so he would help us out. And that was also another case with another teacher of mine. And then so helping out with my studies. And for my LS teacher, he didn't only help me out with subject matters, because at that time I was facing problems at home. And then so he kind of he talked with me, helped me through it, kind of supported me in a way. And then so helped me get through that time. And then even after exams, he still kept in contact with me, asking me, okay, are you still applying for this and that, just in case you don't get through your plan A. So he was, I guess, one tip is teachers have to also identify students who are always willing to push forward, something like that.
Determined?
Very determined. Yeah, and then so, And it's worthwhile, even though it takes up your energy, it takes up your time, but it's worthwhile in the end. Because, like, he really pushed me forward. He could see I was very determined to, get into EduHK.
But also very supportive there.
And he was very supportive, and I guess that's what made my last year of high school quite not as stressed out as I thought it would be. Yeah.
So almost going beyond the classroom.
Yeah, beyond the classroom.
So being supportive within the classroom environment, but also extending that outside too.
Mm-hmm. It's like he can also support, the teachers can also support the whole class. But if there's more determined students and they, you can push them further, and you have to be also open to students' questions. But also at the same time, if you know you can't answer the question, you have to be truthful and say, I know I can help you, but probably you can also lead them to other ways where you can probably help solve your own problem. But then I guess you just have to, language learning, you just have to make it fun. I mean, it's hard, but it's fun. And then, because I remember when learning the language, it was hard. I couldn't pick up much when I was in high school, because even though we're learning it in class, we still don't get to use it outside. During my first 4 years of high school in the other school, it was harder for me to pick up. But in Broadway, there were some teachers, sometimes, like, during recess, they wouldn't talk to us until we tried to ask questions, try to speak to them in Chinese, and they're okay with it. So it showed that we were willing to try, and they would also help us a bit. Like, oh, you can improve it this way. So in a sense, even, beyond the classroom, trying to help your students out, we're trying to learn the subject. So they were kind of forcing us to use Chinese to practice instead of only inside the classroom. It would be hard for teachers to monitor students, but then, they can set up, probably this would be a good idea, fun idea. I'm not sure if it's feasible, but probably they could send, like, a mini competition of sorts. So, like, say, if you can, for example, try and go out and order something in Chinese, and then so there's like a sort of checklist. Of course, I don't know if there's a way that teachers can check if they're genuinely doing the task, but then it would encourage them to speak more if there's, like, probably a little reward at the end if they finish everything. And that's one way they can also learn.